John, I just want to start off with your career and how did you get the music bug?
Um, it really started with, I guess it must have started with my dad. I grew up in Liverpool, on a road just overlooking the docks.
Hmm.
And my dad was a singer, and he used to play all the pubs and the clubs in our area.
Hmm.
Um, just for beer money, really. But he had this unbelievable voice, which sadly I didn't inherit. Um, but he was an amazing singer and he played guitar. So there was always equipment lying around our house, just cheap guitars and amplifiers. It was
Yeah.
always there, but I never really paid attention to it. And then I think I was about 9 or 10. And I think it was my granddad who gave me an LP, the days of LPs.
Oh yeah.
And it was Beatles at the Hollywood Bowl. And so I actually remember this day. I remember sitting down with my little Tandy record player and those horrible sweaty plastic headphones that were the cheapest headphones you could ever buy. And I
Right.
remember this record on, and it was a live one, so it started with all screaming crowds, and I didn't really know who the Beatles were, even though it was Liverpool. It
Correct.
just on my radar. I was just a soccer mad, I didn't care about anything but playing soccer. And I remember putting this record on, and I remember the first song was Twist and Shout. And I just remember feeling this electricity, this crazy feeling of being almost dumbstruck with this sound in my cheap little plastic headphones. This raw, electrifying sound. And, it got to the end of the first side and then I put it on again. I think I must have played that first side of the LP probably about 50 times over and over again before I even turned it over. And these tunes and this energy and this vibe, and when I finally took the headphones off, I remember sitting there, I'm just a kid. I was thinking, that was the most amazing thing I've ever heard. And it clicked with me that, they were this band and they played guitars. And I went downstairs from my room and I went into the kitchen. My dad used to leave his amplifier and guitar in the kitchen for some reason. It was easy to get out and put in his car and go to a pub. I remember looking at this thing. So for the first time, I actually put the plug of the amplifier in and I picked up one of his guitars and I couldn't play it. And I found the chord and I plugged it in and I turned the amp up and I just sat there with my dad's guitar and I just smashed the strings, and this sound came out at me. This big, loud, insane sound. And it was just magic. And that moment of feeling that power of hitting this electric guitar, that was it. That was it. So literally from that moment on, I thought, I've got to be in a band. I've got to see if any other kids at school play any instruments, and we got to form a band. And it was literally, it all happened that quick. It all happened in that moment, and it just changed my life forever.
What a fantastic little story. I mean, as you were narrating it, I was literally envisioning like an opening of a character in a film who is trying to find his place, and then all of a sudden, that moment, he discovers who he is. That's beautiful.
It
Thank you for
really was
sharing.
that moment. No, it was, and I'm just glad I can remember it. But yeah, that was it. That was definitely the power being turned on, the switch being clicked. That was absolutely the moment.
Super. And did you, anytime, I mean, you said your dad had an incredible voice. Did you work with your dad at any point, whether after establishing your career or before?
Well, here's the beautiful thing is, yeah, from that moment, I found some guys in my school who were into music and I convinced a couple of them to just learn to play an instrument, I was so desperate to have a band.
Mm.
But the very first gigs I ever did, and it was probably about 6 months later, because once I decided I wanted to play guitar, I'd practice in the bathroom till literally my fingers would bleed till I could figure these chords out. So my first gigs were actually with my dad. So as soon as he realized that I could play a bit, he'd say, come with me, we're playing this pub. And, I knew all the pubs and clubs because, there was so many of them, and he never really traveled more than a few miles from our house. So I would go with dad, and he'd play these pubs, and I'd kind of stand behind him and try to play leads along with whatever he was playing. And I had no idea what he was going to play next, but it was always 3 or 4 chords. So that was, kind of how I learned to improvise and figure music out by ear, was really playing alongside my dad, and to be doing that at I think I was probably 11 by then, was, again, it's just that experience, the things that stay with you. Just, having to catch up with whatever he was singing and looking around to see where his hands were to figure the chords out. But, that year of doing that 3 or 4 nights a week was my Juilliard, that was my Berkeley. That was how I learned to figure out songs by ear and improvise and play little. And I learned how to play country music because, half of his songs were country songs. So, I learned all this amazing Hank Williams stuff and Johnny Cash and Willie Nelson. That's where my love for real country music, not this stuff in Nashville now, but real country music, that's where that love came from. And he would do loads of doo-wop stuff, and he'd sing the Platters, and I learned all these chord sequences by kind of peering around his guitar as we were playing. And another big rite of passage for me musically was actually with my dad.
Beautiful. That's lovely. It makes it such an interesting story. I definitely think you should work on some sort of a script about your story with your dad, because there's definitely something there. I mean, I can feel.
Well, my dad's story was 1,000 times more interesting. I mean, sadly, he passed away a couple of years ago, but he got to live long enough to see me, moving to Hollywood and having success and but he was always proud of me, my dad. It wouldn't really have mattered. But I'm thankful that he did get to see all that happen. So that's one of the nice things. Because some people, don't have that privilege, but he saw all that happen. So that must have made him happy.
That I think is very important. And sometimes I feel that for the person who wishes that to happen, like, in your case or my case or somebody else's case, I wonder if that's a selfish thought, that you're thinking about your success and being witnessed by your parents. But at the end of the day, I mean, like you said, in your parents' eyes, you're always, the same. They will be happy, of course, you move up, but they'll always be happy with whatever small or big achievements you've made. Yeah,
I mean, that's totally true. I mean, I remember, because I'm a dad now. I have a 19-year-old son and a 16-year-old daughter, and there's nothing they could do that wouldn't make me still proud of them. I understand that now, because more about them, and success doesn't mean anything really. I mean, it doesn't make you a good person or a great person. But when you're a father, you can see the greatness and the goodness in your kids. But at the time when I was trying to make it, I was working hard. When I got my first movie, or when I recorded my first film, the first thing that was always in my head was, I wish my mum and dad were here to see this. So I think all guys have that feeling. I mean, everybody
does.
You just want to, you want to impress your parents first. I mean, that's the most important thing, because they're the ones that deserve to enjoy it more than anybody.
Yeah. Our conversation reminded me of a story. There is, I don't know if she's still the CEO. She was a CEO of PepsiCo in India.
Yeah.
And this is more of a cultural story, but still, she found out that she's been promoted to CEO, and she came home, and her mom lived with her, and her husband and her kids and her dad. And as soon as she walked in, she's like, "Mom, I have a great story, something big to tell you." And her mom is like, "The eggs are finished. Go get them." Right? Yeah. And she's like, she got really upset, and she went to get the eggs. The father wasn't home. And so she came back. She was so upset. She's like, "Here I am trying to tell you that what I've achieved, and you sent me to get eggs." and her mom goes, "I don't care what you are outside, at home. You are a mother, you're a daughter, you're a daughter-in-law." You know,
That's a
that's
good parent. Yeah.
yeah, that is such an incredible story. Like she just literally set her in her place, even at the age of like 46, 50 something.
She's a good mom, you know, I mean,
Yeah.
because we always need to be reminded of who we really are as well, not what
Yeah.
everybody else thinks we are. So no, I mean, that was wise parenting, I think. And you never stop parenting, you know,
No, no.
you
My
do.
dad still parents me. My mom still parents me. I
Yeah.
mean, it's
And
never
you
fine.
know, we always have things to learn from them. So yeah, I mean, that's a nice story, but I totally get that.
Yeah. And how did you get I mean, you have the music bug and you're playing guitar, and I've heard in your work there's a lot of guitar on back and forth here and there, but how did the interest in getting into film take place, and how did you get in?
Well, that was really by by accident, really. Once I'd kind of got into my teenage years, you know, I was very serious about not about becoming a professional musician because I never thought that was on the cards. I was just serious about this is what I wanted to do. So I used to practice in those. I mean, I haven't practiced for 20 years, I don't think, but in those days, I used to really try to be better as a
Mm,
guitarist, and I ended up by the age of about 15, I was playing on records of some of the local bands in Liverpool that were getting signed at the time. So I
right,
became a session player even while I was still at school. And then when I left school, I got offered to play with a band called the Lotus Eaters, who had just had a huge hit in England. And I was also working with a singer called Thomas Lang, who had just been signed to CBS, which is now Sony. So I was already kind of in the mix of being paid for work. So I ended up touring with these bands and a few other bands and playing on records right up until I was 25, I think. And it was amazing because, you know, I got to tour Japan and all over Europe and Scandinavia. But while I was working with these bands, I ended up writing songs with some of them. So I was evolving into more of a songwriter at that point. You know, I was more interested in writing material. And I think I was 25 or 26, and through writing songs for these bands, along with my partner at the time, David Hughes, we somehow got offered the chance to write some songs on a tiny little no-budget film called Leon the Pig Farmer. So we sort of pitched for that. You know, the songs ended up in the film, but the movie was still being made. And it was so low budget, the director and the producer met with us one day and said, "We can't afford to hire a composer to write the score. Do you think you two boys could write a film score?" You know, and, you know, coming from Liverpool, we're like, "Yeah, of course we can." You know, how hard can that be? You know? So we just lied and said we could, of course we could do it. And you know, I've told the story many times, but it's completely true. We had the meeting with the producer and the director in London, and as soon as they left the cafe, we were on Old Compton Street, and Dave and I walked out of the cafe thinking, you know, how the hell are we going to figure out how to write a film score in like a week? But where we were in London, Charing Cross Road was just around the corner, and there was a lot of bookshops there and a lot of film shops.
mm,
We thought we'll go and find a book on how to write a film score. And we walked in the first film bookshop there because it's famous, that little street, for very art stuff. And we walked in and almost like jumping off the shelves like some kind of mythical thing was a book called How to Write a Film Score. This old book. So we thought, destiny. So we bought the book. I think it was like £2 or something. And we got on the train back to Liverpool. And we thought, well, we'll read the book on the train. And when we get back to Liverpool, we'll know how to write a film score. Being from Liverpool, instead of reading the book, because in those days you could get alcohol on the trains to Liverpool.
oh, really?
Yeah, no, you could just go to there and you can just buy some beer from the little bit of the middle of the train. That's all. I think they sold a few newspapers, some potato chips, and then beers and cokes. So we ended up just getting drunk on the train, celebrating. And to this day, we still never read the book. Maybe I would have been a better composer. I don't know, but we never ever read the book. So when we got back to Liverpool, we my little bit of education was I spent a week watching all my favorite movies on VHS, because we had VHS then. Yeah. And I would just make notes, so I watched King Kong, The Godfather, Ben-Hur, all these brilliant movies, Psycho. And I was just sitting there with a little school pad making notes of like where music came in, where it didn't come in, what happened here. Oh, it was a scary bit, So I just did that for a week, and I must have watched about 30 or 40 of my favorite movies. And then I was like, okay, let's write the score. And that was it. But the funny thing was, when this tiny movie came out, it got a huge amount of publicity in England, and it won awards at the Venice Film Festival, and it
wow.
in Europe. So this tiny little movie that we didn't even think was going to come out, that had hired these two clueless songwriters to write this clueless score, got a bit of traction. And of course, because everyone was a first time director, first time composer, we all kind of stuck together. So they went on to make another movie. The writer went on to make another movie, the director, and then the producer. And they all came to me and Dave and said, do you want to write the music for our next movie? And suddenly we were film composers. Completely by default, completely undeserved, no training, no anything. But we worked so hard because we both had that thing. We didn't want to let people down, and we worked our asses off, and we learned as we went along. So it's a strange. It's not the way you're supposed to train to be a film composer, but that's how it happened for me. And you learn by your mistakes, and you never forget your mistakes. So
I think it's the right way, because when you go to film school or music school, not taking away from what you will learn at UCLA or any other, amazing, incredible school, but sometimes, if not most of the times, you have to, be on the set. I mean, that's where you learn the most, to be in that situation. I mean, Spielberg was, I think he dropped out from school or college, I don't remember. So it's just being on the set just teaches you so much, or being on the verge of, like, I was listening to this speech the other day. I'm not sure who it was. Like, when the only way as humans we are able to find out our limitations are not limited is when we are put up against resistance. Like,
absolutely.
That's when the best. We just don't know how capable we are until we're put in the corner.
It's so true, because it's only when you're put in situations where you've never been before that you find out what you actually can do when you're up against it. And that was, not being musically trained in any way and being put in these positions, it forced us to learn. There was no, let's see what the lecture is next week. It forced us to learn out of fear, because we needed to know, how to suddenly use strings and suddenly, but, thankfully, at least, I'm a firm believer that as amazing as it is to have a great musical education with film, because really, for me, the most important thing in film music is actually understanding story.
Of course.
And being able to understand why the characters feel that way, and why this would be important to this character, or why the theme of this movie is important to people. Only when you understand that can you really, in my opinion, really deliver a great score. Without that understanding, you're really just working not really by rote memory, but you're really working to a problem that, has been set up for you by somebody else. So I do think that is at least as important as a great musical education. And at the time, that was all we had to go with. And the rest of it, the nuts and bolts, we just learned along the way. Oh, now we've got brass. How do you write music for brass? Oh, okay, so bass trombones are like, they're the low guys and the trumpets are the high guys, and you just learn, and you learn by ear. And I'm convinced that what helped me sort of break out of the mold, if you like, was not so much what I knew, but a lot to do with what I didn't know, because I was doing things in a way that certainly they wouldn't have taught at Berkeley. But when it's that thing, that beautiful Robert Frost poem, sometimes when you choose the less trodden path, you end up in a place that ends up being unique to you. So, I'm thankful that I came from Liverpool, and I didn't go to music school, and I didn't have any of that stuff, because I ended up just being a better version of me instead of a poorer version of John Williams or Hans Zimmer, and in the end, that helped me more than anything, because I just ended up, having my own sound that worked for me. So I'm thankful for that. But, yeah, for sure, there was 1,000 moments especially when I first come to Hollywood, that I would have loved to have had some kind of musical training, I remember the very first time I could hear something was wrong with the orchestra, and it was, I think it was like 98 or something. Mm. I knew what the problem was, because I could hear it. But I didn't know what the instrument was called. It was something with the brass, and it was big, and it was, I just didn't know what it was called. So I'm trying to explain to the conductor that it's that guy, and and the funny thing is, I still don't know what the instrument was. I've got a feeling it was a chimbasso. But, so moments like that, it just hit you with fear, because, you're trying to explain, and it becomes obvious to this orchestra of amazing musicians that, who the hell is this guy? He doesn't even know what we're playing. So, yeah, there was a lot of moments like that early on, but it's like everything, you learn what you need at the time, and you try to not forget it. So it was the whole thing. Even now doing Guardians, I learned so much about how to write choral music. You never stop learning in this job, and nobody has all the answers, and nobody knows it. Even John Williams, there will be things that he will learn on every film, and I say that with the biggest respect. It's just the nature of this job that you learn new ways of doing things, and that's great. That keeps you fresh, and it keeps you, excited, and it keeps you passionate about your job.
Yeah, at least you're not being repetitive, because once you start being repetitive, even if it's something you love, you're going to end up procrastinating and complacent and all that stuff.
Course,
and
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
So, I mean, I think that happens to a lot of composers, because whatever especially in Hollywood, whatever film it is that you kind of get noticed for originally, then those films gravitate towards you. For me, it was I'd done the 2 Guy Ritchie movies, Lock, Stock, and Scratch, and so suddenly I was offered every kind of hardcore gangster movie and that kind of thing. And then I did 28 Days Later, and then I was Zombie Boy. It was like, you want to do this, and then a couple of years later I did Sunshine, and which for me is one of my best scores. And then it was, I started getting offered sci-fi stuff. So that happens to everybody.
It does.
But I think the trick is, you've got to say to yourself, is this as good as I can do on this type of movie? If it is, I need to be doing something else next time. And eventually, once you've got enough different genres under your belt, people stop pigeonholing you, and you become, a guy who can do a few things. But it certainly keeps you fresh when you don't stay in one genre, because again, same thing, you're learning more from moving about a little bit. And that certainly wouldn't have happened if all I'd done was zombie films for 10 years. So I'm glad I kind of broke out a little bit.
No, that's very true because I fell into the similar trap. I shouldn't say incidentally, but semi-incidentally, directed two feature narrative documentaries. You see the posters in the back,
Oh,
and
right.
they both ended up being about a protagonist and a human rights situation. And
Yeah.
both did, really well and everything. And now every time I'm talking to a friend or somebody in the family and they're sending me these links to these human rights stories, I'm like, I am done. I mean, not that I have anything against that. It's such a heavy subject.
Yeah.
And working on them before and during COVID, especially in post with the editor, it just takes such a toll on you. And you need to, maybe I would love to do it down the road, but for
Yeah.
now, you need
You
a
need a
break from
break.
all this.
Yeah, I mean, the more passionate you are about something, the more it kind of leaves a wound on you
Yeah.
as well, because you become so immersed in that. I totally understand that. Yeah, so you need to just take a break a little bit from that, because that would
Yeah.
be a thing to immerse yourself. At least I'm just dealing with movies. But when you're dealing with, one of my best friends is a documentary filmmaker, Dan Reed, who did the Michael Jackson documentary, and he did some amazing
Okay.
documentaries in Europe. You know, very, very brave and very good man, and he spent his life throwing himself into dangerous situations for, for things that matter to the world. But
Mhm.
I see him sometimes after he's finished something, and he looks shell shocked. When he comes back from he's been to Russia. He went to when the big nuclear thing happened. He went back to Chernobyl. He went, that's kind of where he is. There's a danger
Yeah,
zone.
I get it. I get
Oh
it.
my
You have
God,
to.
Dan's on his way over there, but it does take it out of him. So I totally understand that. He lives and breathes it, and when it's over, you can see he's like, so yeah, I get that.
Yeah. You were talking about Guardians of the Galaxy. Let's talk about that. So, is this your first superhero film, if I'm not mistaken? No, it's not. You did Suicide Squad,
I did
right?
Suicide Squad, yeah.
Oh, sorry, you go on.
No, I was just going to say it's the first film for Marvel. I've done three
Marvel
things, but it's the
or
first movie
DC.
for Marvel.
And how did you come on board working with someone like James Gunn and, on a film like Guardians of the Galaxy, which, has done really, really well in terms of critics, in terms of box office, in terms of
Yeah.
audience?
Well, it really started. Again, it's like such a strange way of getting there. Um, I I kind of messed with the whole superhero thing with Kick-Ass. And I grew up with all of these comic books, even though I grew up in Liverpool. There was a little shop that had,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it would always have 4 or 5 of these American comic books. And to me at the time, they just seemed so exotic. In England we had the Dandy and the Beano, which was this like strange, bizarre, incredibly English sort of homegrown comics. But this other stuff, the Marvel stuff and the DC stuff, they always seemed more exotic to me. It was, and the colors, and so I grew up with reading that stuff. But I did Kick-Ass in 2000, and I'd already decided before I even did that movie that I was going to take a long break. I need, the kids were still small. I just wanted time to be with them, and I was just going to take a few years off, and I'd been doing like 2 or 3 movies a year and back to back. I
Right.
was feeling worse and worse about myself, not being with the kids, and my wife, who was basically manning the fort while I just
Yeah.
piddled around the studio. So they all deserved me to stop for a bit. So, I took a break for a couple of years. And when I realized the effect it had on my family, and especially on the kids as well, I decided to extend that break a little bit. And I set up my own record label. I was doing commercials at the time, but commercials are much easier. They're done
Yeah.
in a, 3 or 4 weeks. So, I did stuff for Nike and Microsoft and Apple. I did some commercials for Apple. So I was working. I just wasn't doing the big slog that a movie is. So I had a lot of time with my family, and it was the best part of my life. In fact, I even got to homeschool one of my kids for a couple of years, which was just amazing. And then I'd sort of realized, they were getting a bit older, and I thought, okay, I really should go back to work here at some point. I can't just play Legos and watch soccer and I need to sort of be a grown up again and go back to work. But we were moving house, so I knew we'd have to build another studio. So that put it back. And then suddenly that 2-year hiatus I'd planned was 7 or 8 years. So I thought, right, what I'll do is I'll come back, I'll do a little bit of television first just to blow the cobwebs away. And then, so I got the chance to do Les Mis for the BBC. I've never seen the musical, but I love Victor Hugo and I loved that book so much. So I thought, that's perfect, and it was 8 episodes, I think. So I thought that'll really blow the cobwebs away. And then the plan was to do a little indie film and then just kind of edge my way back into the whole Hollywood system. So as soon as Les Mis was done, I thought, okay, spoke to my agent, Catherine Greaves, and I thought, let's find a little indie movie and I'll sneak back in without anyone realizing, I'd been away. And I thought, no one's going to remember me now. It's all different heads of music. It's all different people, but that's okay. I'll just do a few indie movies. And then just while we were looking for this little indie movie for me to work on, I got a call, and it was James Gunn, and he said, look, I've always loved your stuff. I play your tracks when I'm writing scripts, and are you interested in working on the Suicide Squad? So I was just like, dumbstruck. I said, I love your stuff. I love all of your stuff, not just The Guardians, because he was one of my favorite directors, and he said, great, can you come to Atlanta tomorrow? So I flew to Atlanta the next day, and I met up with him, and it was just one of those meetings. I mean, the guy is so passionate about this genre that it's hard not to sort of be drawn to that. I can see why all the actors love him and everyone, because he just has that pure passion. There's nothing cynical about him. He just wants to make great movies that he would love to see. So, I just said straight away, I said, if you want me, you've got me, and I can start whenever. And he went, great, because I think he was actually, halfway through shooting the Suicide Squad when I flew over to meet him, and he said, I really want to shoot to some scenes. Can you go back and write these scenes for me to shoot to? Because they're coming up in a few weeks. And I thought, wow, that's different, but let's do that. So I went back, wrote some stuff, and was just sending him ideas and tunes like from the script. The scripts are very vivid, he's a great storyteller, so the scripts were easy to write to. And we just had the best experience on Suicide Squad. It was just a dream project, and everything was fun. It felt like it actually felt like working on an indie movie. That's the kind of vibe he gives off, where, can we get away with this? Oh, let's just do it anyway. Or do you think we can, he was always, he's a rebel. So he was always breaking the rules and let's just try this. So it felt like working on an indie movie. And towards the end of that project, he rang me up one day and said, I really want you to do the next Guardians. And, I wasn't expecting that. I was just enjoying doing the Suicide Squad. And I went, well, you know what my answer is. So, of course, So, and that's how that worked about. So as soon as Suicide Squad finished, I took a little break with the family again. And he went off to do Peacemaker. So I had my break with the family. And when the time was right, I looked at the script for Guardians. And same thing, I wrote most of the themes before he shot them. So I wrote all of these themes and I'd be sending them to him. He'd be coming back with ideas. I'd love that one, not sure about that one, use a bit of that one, So it was a very collaborative process. There's not a single piece of music on any of, either Guardians or Suicide Squad that didn't come back and forth between us. And he's a musician too. He knows what he's talking about. He's very musically savvy. So, that was kind of how it worked. And yeah, I mean, it was just, it was a joy to work with him. It's very intense because, he's got a very high bar.
Yeah.
Just, if he doesn't think something's as good as it can be, then we'll just do it again until it is. So, but that was how it all came about. From me looking for a little indie movie to working on this huge DC monster and then working on a huge Marvel monster. So it's just how things worked out, really. Someone's looking out for me.
That's sweet. That's really sweet. And how long did it take you to sort of complete the final score, starting from the time when you're sending samples and like how long is the process?
Well, it's kind of in two
Stages.
Sections with James, yeah, because I wrote all of these themes and pieces for him to shoot to, and then I got to wait then until he shoots the movie. So I had this big period of waiting for the next bit. But I got the chance to score the holiday special, which was fun. I've always wanted to do a Christmas thing. So as soon as that was shot, I worked on that. And then as soon as that was done and it came out, and actually there was a little gap, I think. And then 4 or 5 months ago, I started to get picture and then I was able to work on Guardians. So, you kind of do it in 2 bits with a big gap in the middle with James. Right. And then it's the usual intense, big ramp up to the end. So, but it's a good way to work because in that middle, you get time to think about what you're going to do.
You get a break.
You get a break, and you get to do the things that you need to do to keep you human, before the pressure comes on.
Yeah.
But it's a good way to work. I love writing from the script. And with his script, it's all there on the page. The things I cried about reading Guardians was the same thing that I had a tear in my eye when I watched the finished film at the premiere. It's all there in the script with him. It's all in there.
So everybody's different, whether you're a director, writer, composer, cinematographer, sometimes people watch or listen to different things before they get on to start working on something. How do you stay away from any kind of music when you're writing a score like Galaxy, or just so that it doesn't, subconsciously come into the film that you're working on?
Yeah, you have to really, because you want to really start from a blank page. If I'd never watched, if I'd never seen the first 2 Guardians films, then I would have had to have watched them because, there's got to be some connective tissue. Yeah. So certainly I would have watched the first 2 films probably a couple of times just to get a feel for the tone and the attitude of the score. But I'd already seen the first 2. In fact, I'd seen both of the previous Guardians films several times over because I've got kids. So, you take them to the cinema the first time and you watch it with them and you experience it in a theater. And then, the way kids are, I'll be like, let's watch, kids. Kids will just watch the same movie over and over again. So, I must have watched both films 2 or 3 times even after we saw them, at the movies. So I knew what they were about, and I loved them. And I actually loved the scores that Tyler Bates did on the first 2 movies. I've known Tyler for 10 years and, I think he's a brilliant composer and a seriously nice guy as well. And so I was, I knew what they were about. So I didn't have to go back and watch the movies again. I felt I was in a place where I could just, what was important was really having conversations with James about how this one was going to be, because, it's a darker movie than the first 2. And because so many things had to be tied up and explained. And we had to, obviously, this was Rocket's story, you know, and without giving the game away, it's a very traumatic story. So, so by nature of the content within the story, it was always going to be a more serious film.
Mhm.
So we knew the tone would be different, and so it had to be its own score. But we also knew that we were going to, you know, use the original theme in a few places, because that's what we wanted. We wanted to be able to remind the audience and keep that connective tissues. But we just, you know, we picked the right moments, I think. And that was fun to work on too. So, you know, I think we got it right. But you know, the worst thing you can do when you're trying to write a score is to be listening to other stuff, because by nature things can get stuck in your head, and
Yeah, for
you know,
sure.
it's better to just pull from the well of the story and the characters, because it will always come. The second you start listening to what other people are doing, it's just muddies the waters, I think, for me.
Was there ever, a, for the lack of a better word, a eureka moment when you were doing the score of Guardian where you were kind of stuck with something and you couldn't figure out the next step? And I don't know whether you went on a hike or, you know, taking a shower or just chilling and something just came in the middle of the night. Was there anything ever like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's always moments like that, because I realized at a point that the more original stuff I tend to write tends to come from just writing in my head. You know, I think every composer has that thing where, you know, if you sit at a piano, that your hands tend to hit the same chords, or you play guitar, you'll tend to, you know, that lizard brain instinctive muscle memory thing. And I realized that, you know, the more original stuff was what was kind of would just pop into my head. So I went for walks around the house, and sometimes you wake up and there's the tune that you were trying to figure out the night before when you're sitting at the piano is just playing on loop in your head. That was the case certainly with the Alien opera. You know, there's a very important piece in the middle of the movie where the High Evolutionary explains why he is the way he is, what's driving him, what his motivation is. And this song was very much tied up with, you know, because he's actually playing the song in the scene. So he's talking to Rocket while they're both listening to the song. So it was an incredibly important piece of music. And I think it took me 6 or 7 goes. And again, I was writing it from the script. So that took a long time. And that was one of those things where I woke up one morning and it was just playing. This melody was just playing in my head. So yeah, I mean, that happens. And sometimes you just got to wake up and sing it into your phone or something, because you always think you're going to remember these things in your head. That's the problem with writing in your head, is you think it's so good, I'm never going to forget it. And you walk around the corner, one of the kids shouts something at you and it's gone, you know. So I've learned now to just sing it into my phone straight away. So yeah, there's you know, there were a lot of moments like that, but that was probably the most important, given the nature of how it was within the story.
Has there ever been a time without, I don't want any names because I'm not looking for controversy. Has there been any time when you composed a track or a theme that you felt strongly about in the last 25 years of your career, but it, you know, the director didn't agree with you, and you still felt even after the film came out that that track that you thought was good would have been better? Has that ever happened?
I think that happens on every move I ever do.
Okay, that's...
Yeah, that happens on everything. I don't remember thinking, you know, I mean, look, every film I've ever done, you know, you're never going to agree with the director on everything. And I always like to, you know, to give the director more than one option. You know, because I'm hedging my bets too, because I'm not sure. You know, I might be sure that something's a better piece of music, but I'm never sure that it's the best thing for the movie. The director has a better idea than me. But yeah, there's been moments when I've torn my hair out because, they've just gone for the wrong version. But as my wife always says, why don't you just do the one version that you think is the best? And I think there's
Don't give them an option.
Yeah, and she says, well, why did you give him three versions? It's
I think she's right. When you give choices to people,
yeah, of course she's right. And she still says that to me now. But yeah, there's always, there's always things that you don't agree with, but you're there to help make his film, not the other way around. So you just have to. In the old days, I used to get, God, I took it so seriously. I used to get really angry. I'd have arguments with stand-up arguments, directors. Believe me, I was such a pain in the ass in the old days. At least now I'm a little older and a little, hopefully a little wiser. But yeah, in the old days, I must have been a nightmare to work with. I just argued over everything. So yeah, there are moments like that, but I don't think there's been too many of those moments with James. I tend to just kind of trust him. If he says no, this will be better.
Yeah,
I just move on.
I don't think you should feel bad about it, because I think everybody, when you're young, like I used to do that all the time, and now it's kind of like, by age, you kind of become more calmer, more wiser, and you just go along with it, and you trust your team that is working with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what it is.
Yeah. I mean, I still have my moments, trust me, but yeah, I think when you've got a good team, I've worked with the same producer engineer for nearly 20 years, Tyler Barton, and he's my first firewall. I'm like, is this as good as I think it is, or is this totally like rubbish? And he'll always be honest with me. So it is as much about, yeah, we get wiser, I think, when we get older and we get more chilled out about stuff. But you're absolutely right. When you have, you only need one or two people you trust, and you can.
Yeah.
You've got to listen. You got to listen to them and go, well, maybe it's not the Oscar-winning theme I thought it was.
Everything is Oscar winner when you're working on it. Something, this is gonna do this. You have this vision in your head, and then reality hits, and then you're like, okay.
Yeah. I mean, that was just a joke. I mean, I've never thought, this is, I'm just not that. I mean, in my head, I'm still just an indie composer. I mean, yeah. I never ever thought I'd be doing big movies, because that's not what I wanted to do. It was always
it's always the opposite of what you want.
Yeah, the movies I loved with the kind of edgy, low budget stuff. For me, I used to call them real movies. But again, things change, and you realize you can work with amazing people doing big movies too. So I just kind of evolved into that place, really. Yeah, I mean,
yeah. And that Oscar thing, I mean, that usually happens when you're young and stupid. Right?
Yeah.
As you get older, then you're like, okay, let's just focus on this. And do you listen to international music for inspiration? Like whether it's remote folk music or some other part of the world?
Yeah, I mean, completely. And not just international music here, either. I listen to music all the way back to, very early Renaissance music. I mean, my playlist is as schizophrenic as you could imagine. I could be listening to the, punk one morning, and then I'm listening to Bach, or I'm listening to from all over the place. Yeah, I mean, that's because you learn from everything. Even if it's in music that you don't particularly think you would ever get into. There's always a point when you force yourself, where you go, so that's what it's about,
Yeah.
There's a moment where you go, that's what it's about. That's why it means something to people. So, I've got a very open mind, and the same with film scores as well. I mean, there are Japanese films, there are Korean films, there are Indian films, there are African films that have such a different take music in film that it's, you know, it's exhilarating to see how other people do it rather than just the guys in this town that you kind of know for them. And you've got to get out of that. I mean, we live in a cocoon in Hollywood, that whole world. It's, you know, we think we're the only people who are making movies sometimes, and you really have to force yourself. You got to get out of that mindset and start watching stuff. And thankfully, you know, my wife is a writer, Charlotte, and she, you know, half the time she's watching a movie, it's movies no one would ever have heard of, and we sit there, and some of the best films we've seen in the last 10 years have been movies that we would never have seen in a cinema. You know, it's and old stuff too, you know, like from all over the world. So, you know, thankfully, you know, to her, you know, we've had that experience, and it's not just about Hollywood. It was never just about Hollywood. It's just that sometimes some of Hollywood thinks it is, you know. Yeah. There's a whole other world out there of music and film music.
There is. I was talking to David Robbins, it was Tim Robbins' brother.
Yeah.
He did the music for Dead Man Walking.
Dead Man Walking, a brilliant score, yeah.
Yeah. So one of the vocals in that film who passed away a couple of years after that was a Sufi singer from Pakistan. Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan. So we were talking about that, and then we somehow got in this conversation. If you're very much into guitar, you should look into. There's a show. There's an Indian version, but there's a Pakistani version, which is way better. It's called Coke Studio.
Right.
So they actually just in a studio setting, they redo some old songs with new ways, and they come up with original stuff. You would really appreciate it. It's
I'll definitely check that out. Yeah.
It's on YouTube, Apple, Spotify. Production value is extremely high, and just the types of instruments that they use. I mean, it's you can hear just whiskers of it in the background. It's beautiful.
That's what I love too. I mean, nothing gets me excited than seeing or hearing an instrument that I've never used before, because I love that stuff. You know, it's like, you know, it's the first thing I do when I read a script. I'm not even so much worried about, you know, how I'm going to go about it. It's like, what new things can I use on this, you know? And, you know, my instruments that I use are from all over the world. I mean, you know, everyone says, oh yeah, John does the guitar stuff and everything. But in truth, there's loads going on that
we don't hear.
Yeah, but if you took them away, it'd just be some guy playing a guitar, you know.
Exactly.
So the secret sauce is, you know, the secret sauce on Guardians was, it sounds like, you know, a wall of guitars sometimes, but you know, mixed into that wall of guitars is you know, fuzz basses going through pedals, but also distorted gongs. You know, I use tongue drums so much in this movie, and again, they're going through fuzz pedals, these little tongue drums, and you know, different bits of percussion from all over the world. Thunder sheets, you know, again being distorted. Beautiful. And all this kind of stuff. You know, I even used a little is it a marimba or something, you know, the tiny little things that you press with your finger. You know, because I will fuzz anything. I will put anything through a guitar pedal. You know, and we use one of those, you know, and you play it and then you put it through a guitar pedal, and it just sounds like this insane big, you know, that's a little African instrument. And so, you know, for me, that's part of the fun is finding these different things from different cultures and different, you know, different sensibilities, and just seeing how they can work in a modern setting. And sometimes you just want to hear them in their purity, and other times, you know, usually with me and Tyler, we'll just get a great sound and then look for the best guitar pedal to put it through. Yeah. You get this mix of stuff that feels unique. You know, because otherwise it is just me smashing away on a guitar. So it's not just guitar that's out.
Music is such an international language. I mean, if it's done right, you know, even if you're listening to a song that you have absolutely no clue what it says, but you could still feel the
I
emotion.
feel it, yeah, because, and that's because, humans relate to humans. And even if you don't understand the story behind a song or good example, not that it's non-European, but, because, we're talking about, very early opera, even though you may not understand the lyrics because they're either in Italian or they're in German or whatever, you can feel the emotion. We don't need to be literally, to have it
Understanding everything.
no, because somehow we know that this person is singing in anguish or in triumph or in melancholy, because we're humans and we're not different really. We just, we just saying the same things in different languages. So we feel that instinctively. So yeah, music is an almighty leveler in that, and that, we all, if something's emotional and it means something and it has something about it, then we'll all feel that. That's what's wonderful about music. It doesn't care, It either
100%.
means something or it doesn't.
So true, John. Just lastly, what are your future plans? Are you taking a break, or is there something on the horizon that you're able to talk about?
Um,
Like I said, like you're able to talk about. I specified that.
no, I mean, I never talk about what's next. It's just always better that way. But
Sounds
in
good.
projects, it's I'd never have done so. But what's next for me is, again, some time with the family. I'm going up to Connecticut with my son. He's going to Yukon, so we're going to spend some time there and get him, settled into his new place, and then I'll start working on something. But I'm always the last person that ever talks about what's next. I wait till everybody else has said it. So.
No, it's a good move, because until the documents are signed and until everything is approved and good to go,
Sure,
then
yeah.
right? Why
Yeah,
announce it before?
yeah, I'd let other people, and I like being under the radar. So, but my only plans right now are to just,
Fair enough.
see out the Premier League, see what happens at the end of that season, and just hang out with the kids and my wife. So that's my plans. That's what's next for me, for sure.
Lovely. That's lovely. Well, thank you so much, John, for your time.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed it. I would love to chat with you again, perhaps some of your past work in the next coming months.
Anytime.
We'll
Really
reach out
enjoyed
to
it.
your
Thank you.
agent and we'll schedule something.
For sure.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you,
And
John.
good luck with whatever your next project is, and hopefully it won't be anything as harrowing and
Somehow I have a feeling it might be, but I'm trying not to.
whatever it is, good luck with it. So
yeah, for sure. Thank you, John.
all right, thank you, Joe. Thank you very much.